Yeah.
All right. Thanks, everyone. I'm glad that you chose to spend your lunch hour with us today, and I'm excited to have been invited to be the first speaker in the Benzie Conservation District lunchtime webinar series, which I think is a great idea. Learn a little bit something new while you're having your lunch break. As Kyla mentioned, I am a faculty member at Michigan State University, where I'm an aquatic ecologist, outreach specialist. I work on lakes, streams, and watersheds. I direct our MiCorps volunteer stream monitoring and lake monitoring programs. And I'm also the director of the MSU Extension Center for Lakes and Streams. So it's always great to engage with organizations like the Benzie Conservation District that's been so active for so long in protecting our water resources. I actually live most of the time in Traverse City, so I'm practically a neighbor, even though I do commute down to East Lansing pretty regularly for campus-based work. So yes, I'm very pleased to be here, and today I'm going to be sharing information and the results of a research project that was actually conducted by a student in my lab at Michigan State University, Maria Blights. She's now pursuing a graduate degree at Oklahoma State University. But a couple of years ago, she spent the better part of a year doing a literature review, so a review of published reports and articles about different types of boat cleaning systems. And she also interviewed a lot of experts in the field because we were finding, both myself and my colleague Kevin Walters at the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, we get a lot of questions and requests from folks, especially lake communities, lake associations, who are concerned, and rightly so, about the introduction and spread of aquatic invasive species by trailered boats. And many communities are interested in investing in and installing boat cleaning systems at their boat launch sites to prevent that spread. And the question is always, well, what kind should we get? There's a lot of them out there. What should we do? How expensive are they? How hard are they to operate? And so forth. And so we wanted to dig into what was really known about that, both in the published literature and from experts who have a lot of experience doing this kind of work. So, what I'm going to present to you today is the outcome of that work. Again, a lot of the credit for this work goes to Maria. Again, she's off doing graduate school now, but we're excited to be able to share the work that she did. And even a lot of these slides is an effort that Maria put together for us. So let's dive in. So I think this is going to be fairly common knowledge for all of you on the call today, but how do aquatic invasive species spread? One thing we know from a lot of research confirms that trailered boats are the number one way that once an invasive species gets into Michigan waters, um, it's trailered boats that are moving them from one place to another. There's other pathways, of course, but they're not as significant as trailered boats. So we're going to focus on that for this presentation. Let's think about that pathway. Here's a boat in a lake. We've got two lakes here, and one of them has this green blob. That's our invasive species. Maybe that's Eurasian water milfoil for a common example. And the boat is likely going to be moving around in areas where that milfoil is growing in the shallower parts of the lake, where it could get tangled on the boat's hull, on the prop of the motor, and so forth, or even at the boat landing itself. Often invasive species, because they're spread by boats on trailers, will be growing in the vicinity of that boat ramp. So as you back your boat down in, or as you're pulling it out, the trailer may also come in contact with these invasive species. And what often happens after this boat it becomes contaminated with invasive species, it may travel to another nearby lake, or maybe a lake on the other side of the state, or even in another state. And when that happens, those plants are transported with the boat into a new water body. And so that's the justification for wanting to give boaters the opportunity to clean their boats and trailers before moving from one water body to the next. We know from research on invasive species also, and a lot of us have had this experience too, that prevention is far less expensive and resource intensive than actually trying to deal with an invasive once it's become established in your lake. And so the old phrase that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure really does apply here. We're looking at a situation where everything we can do to keep an invasive species from entering a lake in the first place is effort well spent in a lot of ways. So that's why a lot of our communities and states and even federal agencies are investing in different kinds of boat cleaning equipment. And what we're going to look at is two main approaches to boat cleaning, waterless and water-based. And so waterless systems, a brand name we often see is CD3, but there are other systems out there as well, where there's no actual water. You're not actually washing the boat, but they may have a variety of tools like pressurized air, to blow and dry the boat, and to blow off plant fragments and so forth, a scrub brush for physical removal. A plug wrench is also a really valuable tool. For example, in Michigan, it is unlawful to leave a boat landing with your drain plug still installed in your boat. You have to pull it out and let water drain out. And so providing a wrench to help people get those out, they can be a little finicky at times, is a really helpful thing. A wet dry vacuum like a shop vac to suck out any remaining water in the boat is very helpful. A grabber tool like a big pair of tongs to help you like reach under a trailer is another really useful tool to have. And so this kind of system that's pictured here actually has power associated with it. You might actually solar panels on the top that runs the vacuum and the air blower and so forth. But there are also much simpler waterless systems that are simply the provision of tools, scrub brushes, grabbers, plug wrenches, that can be, don't require any kind of power at all, but still facilitate the cleaning and actually remind boaters of the importance of cleaning. So without water are many of the systems we see, but we do also see water-based systems. So in this case, you will have water that's available to spray on the boat to actually wash it down, the boat and the trailer. That water may be heated and it may be under pressure. And in this case of water-based systems, those invasive species are removed either by the water spray, they're physically removed, or they're actually killed by exposure to high temperatures. So we looked at all of these different kinds of systems. We also looked at the kinds of outreach and education that can be done to encourage people to use it. So we're going to dive into all of that today. And I will note that all of the results that I'm sharing with you today have been published in the journal Lake and Reservoir Management. I'll provide a link at the end where you can access that paper. And we've also done some summary articles about it as well. As I mentioned before, Maria spent time comparing and researching the different kinds of systems so that she could better understand what our experiences were collectively with their effectiveness in terms of how well they clean the boats, how well these approaches helped us actually reach boaters and get them to do the work that we asked them to do, and how much they cost, by reviewing published literature and interviewing a large number of experts across the region, mostly in Michigan. So first, let's talk about decontamination effectiveness. Hot water. A lot of times when we talk to folks about cleaning boats, the assumption is that if you want to do it right, if you want to have the best possible cleaning station, it's got to have hot water that you can spray because it will kill invasive species. One of the take homes that I'm going to give you today as we go through this information is that this is not always the best for your situation, but keep that in mind as we talk through some of the pros and cons of these different systems. So to clean with hot water, the focus is actually using water that's hot enough that it's actually going to kill the invasive species that may be on your boat. It is recommended and so forth. However, a lot of the studies out there actually looked at immersion of equipment in hot water. we can't immerse people's boats in hot water, right? We're not going to have a big tank of hot water. So a lot of the research that really emphasizes the benefits of hot water cleaning was actually focused on immersing equipment. So while you might be able to immerse a wetsuit or, waders or something like that in hot water for boating, it takes a lot more effort and a lot hotter water to actually kill things like plants and zebra mussel larvae and so forth with hot water. You need to have at least 140 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a problem because water that hot can cause a second-degree burn in just 2 seconds of exposure. So that's dangerous for recreational boaters to be asked to use. It also opens up the possibility of liability claims against any community who makes that available. The trade-off then would potentially be to hire staff, and you can see the cost going up with that. And we're going to talk about cost here in a minute. Having trained staff that can protect against liability claims if you're offering hot water cleaning. If we're looking at high pressure water, which is probably more often used, the focus is not on killing the invasives, but it's focused on knocking them off, cleaning them off with that pressure that hits the side of the boat. And what we know is that, for certain species, that can be very effective. For example, one research study found that washing with a pressure washer, not necessarily heated, could remove 91% of spiny water fleas and the seeds from aquatic plants from a boat, which made it about 25% more effective than just removing them by hand and looking at the boat. However, it's important to remember that this isn't killing the AIS. So there needs to be something, a plan for what's going to happen to all the stuff that gets knocked off by that pressure washing, right? Because if you are at a boat launch, sitting on the ramp, and you use a pressure washer on a boat, all those invasives you knock off are still alive. So you don't want them to end up washing right back into the lake. So there needs to be some containment structure built into the system so that that doesn't happen. Either some kind of containment right on site or do the cleaning far enough away from the shoreline that those organisms that are knocked off the boat don't have a chance of being washed back into the lake itself. So that's something to think about. Another thing to think about is that many invasive species settle in areas that typically, according to the studies we saw, may be missed by boat wash spray. Someone needs to do a fairly thorough job if they want to get every surface of the boat and trailer with a pressure washer. And some pressure washers do have attachments. The small image there you can see on the slide shows someone using the regular nozzle. This is actually some equipment that we own, and there are attachments that have a roller where you can go under and it'll spray straight up and get the bottom of the boat, and those kinds of attachments lead to a more thorough cleaning on site. All right, that's some information about our high pressure and heated systems. Let's think about the ones that don't use water. So the focus there is on visual inspection, looking at the boat and trailer and removing them by hand without any kind of water. And by hand, you can also use tools like vacuums and grabber tools and so forth. What we found by reviewing the literature again is that removing things without water is just as effective at removing plants as if you had water. So see, there's really no difference for removing aquatic plants from a boat. You can do it effectively without having water as part of your cleaning station. It's very, very similar. And although visual inspection can be performed with just your hands, right? You can just ask people to look around on their boat and pull off any mud or plants that they see. It's a lot easier if you provide some tools. That's especially important as we keep in mind that some of our boaters may have mobility challenges. They might not be either able or willing to crawl around under their boat, pulling plants off. That's going to take time. That many of our boaters say is the #1 reason they don't clean their boats, is that it takes too much time and they'd rather be out on the water or heading home because they've had a long day on the water. So giving tools really facilitates that cleaning. And so with waterless stations like the ones pictured, we find find that people in particular really appreciate the availability of grabber tools, big tongs or the little claspy reachers that you can provide on a cleaning station. Here's some data from CD3 waterless cleaning stations on Higgins Lake. And 52% of the tool uses recorded by that station is use of those tongs, those grabbers. People also use the plug wrench shown in green and the scrub brush shown in red there in the middle, but those were used less than half as often as those grabber tools were used. So we know that people use them if you provide them, which is really great to see. And the other thing about providing tools and not just a reminder for people to clean is that it's a stronger reminder. We want you to clean your boat and we're providing you with some stuff to do it. That definitely has an outreach benefit. Air drying, the phrase is always clean, drain, dry. We've talked about cleaning and draining, but what about drying? We get questions a lot about whether, from a boater, they'll say, well, I'm going to just let my boat dry. Isn't that okay? And it definitely has some benefits. And when we looked into the literature, there's really two kinds of drying. You can actively dry your equipment, meaning using towels and sponges to remove any remaining water or dampness from your boat. And that's really great because water may contain things like seeds and larvae, and it also prevents the survival of any life that may be on your boat. Passive drying is just leaving everything open, leaving it out in the sun or whatever, and allowing it to dry naturally without you actually toweling it off. These methods, just like the waterless cleaning, is low risk. There's low concern about liability. People aren't going to hurt themselves doing this, so communities need to keep that in mind. And drying is nearly universally recommended by invasive species managers and natural resources organizations. However, of course, it varies on how effective it is. One thing to keep in mind is that a lot of states and organizations, like, for example, this outreach information from Michigan recommends that we dry things for at least 5 days, or we clean it, right? Because a lot of boaters are not interested in waiting 5 days before they use their equipment again. They're going to want to use it more often than that during that boating and recreational season. For example, data looking at boaters in Wisconsin showed that almost 40% of people who have boats in Wisconsin use them in more than one water body over 5 days. Another study in the UK said 64% of boaters, again, are really transient, meaning they move from one water body to the next in a 5-day period. In the UK, we're looking at 64%, 2/3 of boaters are not going to wait 5 days before they use their boat somewhere else. So that's something that we need to keep in mind as well. There is a fair amount of data out there looking at how long an invasive species needs to be dried before it actually dies. And so this is something important for lake communities to keep in mind. What kind of species are you worried about? If it's mostly things like spiny water flea and other plankton, just a few hours out of the water will lead to death. And so drying is a really effective approach to controlling them. You don't even need to wait half a day and they will not survive if they're out and out of water. Plants, it can really vary. Here we say desiccation susceptible aquatic plants. This would be our leafy plants that there may be just a sprig or two hanging on a trailer or laying on the floor of a boat. Between 3 hours and 2 days is how long it takes for that plant to dry out enough that if it ended up back in water again, it would not, continue to live, be able to reproduce and become invasive. But we also have this category of desiccation tolerant plants. And in this case, it's not necessarily by species, but think about if you took your motorboat through a big bed of a plant like Eurasian water milfoil, and the prop went through it, and you came out and there was just a twisted knot of Eurasian milfoil on your boat propeller. That's going to take maybe 7 days before that actually dries out enough because it's so densely packed, it's going to stay wet for a long time. And just letting it sit there, even in the sun, it may take up to a week before all that milfoil is dead. So that's important also for us to keep in mind. And then finally, when we think about things like mussels and snails, they take a really long time. Things with shells last a really long time out of water, some of them up to 9 weeks. So obviously, if zebra mussels, adult zebra mussels or quagga mussels are an invasive species of concern in your community, relying solely on recommending people dry their equipment is not going to be enough for your to stop the spread and kill invasive mussels. All right, that was looking at the equipment itself. Now let's talk a little bit about outreach effectiveness and different ways to get people to actually use our boat cleaning stations. Looking a little bit at what we know about human behavior, really briefly, something that we know, we can look at certain qualities of the target audience to predict how likely they are to participate in a particular behavior, like cleaning, draining, or drying their boats and recreational equipment. And we can look at a few different categories. So their awareness of the issue, their attitudes about the issue, and then also social norms. So, what is expected of them in the community? And research after research, and not just on boaters, but on all sorts of behaviors that we want to encourage. Things like recycling, or getting medical care, or eating a healthy diet. We know that just telling people that say invasive species are bad for the lake and you should clean your boat is not enough to get them to actually do it. People need more. They need to actually believe that if they clean their boat, they're going to help protect their lake. They're going to help stop invasive species. They need to think that they're going to be able to do it well enough that it's going to make a difference. That's really critical and gets us thinking about helping people by providing tools and providing clear instructions on how to clean their gear. And then finally, the strongest driver of human behavior really does tend to be social norms. Everybody expects me to do it. If people see me not cleaning my boat, they're going to think poorly of me. It's that peer pressure thing, right? And so that's also very important. And I've witnessed that in our operation through MSU with a mobile boat cleaning station that we offer in partnership with lake groups all around the state. We find that, often if we offer the boat wash and offer to clean someone's boat for them, we're not even asking them to do it, just to wait for us for a few minutes while we do it and tell them a little bit about invasive species. Often people will say no, but when they will say yes is often because they see someone else cleaning their boat, letting us wash their boat. People like to get in line. People like to do what seems to be what everyone's doing in a group. We are that kind of species, like it or not. And so we find that our acceptance rate, the number of boats and boaters that say, sure, you can wash my boat, skyrockets when we're already washing a boat. They want to do what other people are doing. So that is an interesting example to think about, because often the people who tell us, no, we don't need to wash our boat, we only go here. We live, a mile down the road. We only take our boat into Crystal Lake. And so obviously we're not spreading invasive species because we don't go anywhere else. True, we agree that that is a common sense truth. However, wouldn't you like all the other boaters here to see you washing your boat? Because we know that actually helps. If people see somebody else doing it, they're more likely to do it. So that's something for us to keep in mind when we're thinking about the kind of events we're doing, the education we're doing, and even us, if we're local and never take our boat anywhere else, why it makes sense for us to go ahead and go through the process of cleaning our boat. I mean, I'll be honest, I confess, now that I know this, every time I go hiking, even if I'm only going to the trail right down the road from my house where I go all the time and I haven't worn these boots anywhere else but there, especially if there's other people around, I always make sure I use that boot brush station, because I want people to see me cleaning my boots off in hopes that they will do the same thing, even though I am a very low risk person at that spot. All right. one of the easiest and most straightforward things we can do at boat launches is to have signage. When we talk to boaters, they consistently say that, yep, I read signs. I see the sign that says clean, drain, and dry. I see the sign that says stop aquatic hitchhikers. They're low maintenance, they're inexpensive. We can hang up signs, we can paint with stencils on the parking lot. However, what we find is that we need to reach people in more than one way. That is another kind of commonly known um, tenet of communication and outreach and education, is that people learn best when there's at least two forms of information and provided to them. So just having a sign sitting there, people get kind of numb to them, like that sign's everywhere. I think I know what it says. I don't really care what it says, maybe. Also, a lot, I don't know about your experiences, but a lot of the boat launches that I go to, I find that the signs are not always placed in areas that make them easy to see. They may be overgrown, faded. They might be old signs with outdated information. You can see one of our students here is applying a decal to a help stop aquatic hitchhiker sign at a Michigan boat launch that had outdated information about the laws in Michigan. Luckily, the state gave us stickers that when we went around and saw old signs, we could apply these decals that provided the updated rules that says you must clean and drain your boat before leaving. So signage is good, but our research shows us that it shouldn't be the only kind of outreach we're doing. So what else can we do? Staffed outreach, right? Having people at the boat launch talking to boaters really does seem to, in the literature that we've reviewed, does help connect to boaters' values and attitudes, which we know is really important for behavior, more than just having a sign. And, of course, if you have a hot water cleaning station, you probably already have staff there. It can be expensive, obviously, to hire people or even to manage volunteers to do outreach. And, of course, staff can't be there all the time. That doesn't mean that they're not important, especially when new cleaning equipment is installed at a boat launch site. It's really important at that beginning to raise as much awareness as you can with boaters to know what that thing is and that they're allowed to use it. That's critical. I've seen lots of boat cleaning stations be installed around Michigan, and the community's excited, they put it in, but you go there and like nobody knows what it is, no one's using it, they think they're not supposed to touch it because it looks expensive, those kinds of things. So having, there could be some events or some promotional days or busy weekends, have some volunteers out there showing people how to use it and making sure that the signage directs people there. That can be very, very valuable. One final bullet here on this slide points out that when researchers talk to boaters, they say that no, that's not the top way that they got information about boat cleaning. They're much more likely to say they got information off signs. But I think that has to do with quantity and not so much quality of the interaction. The quality of the interaction can make a really big difference. As you can see, we've got a boater here talking with one of our other students at a previous event that we held at a boat launch. Mass media, radio, TV, news stations, those kinds of things, newspapers, those can all be additional parts of your outreach strategy. It can reach a broad audience, especially those who may not see the information otherwise. It can build that community sense of like our community is behind clean, drain, and dry, and this is really important. You can share press releases and those kind of things. Many of the experts that we interviewed did talk about the value of having mass media events when they opened a new cleaning station to raise community awareness of this facility and these tools that were an investment locally and were there for the public to use. And so that's really important to get out there, as I've mentioned already. And so it's important for broad awareness, but maybe not so important for in-depth awareness. People, again, are more likely to listen to one-on-one engagement with another person about, to get them to change their behavior. Listening to a friend or, I'll talk about this in a minute, like people who they trust in the natural resources community to encourage them to clean their boats. But it certainly helps raise broad awareness of the issue and the availability of cleaning stations. Um, Online outreach is very similar to mass media. Um, Studies have shown variable success with using it. It's low cost and low maintenance, so it certainly doesn't hurt. It raises people's awareness. Maybe they see a post about cleaning their boat or a new boat wash station in their community on social media. And then when they go there, they see it and that reinforces it like, oh, yeah, I remember I saw this on TV or I saw this on Facebook. That can be really valuable. And Interestingly, one study pointed out the value of podcasts as being a way that was just as effective as a one-on-one presentation from, in this case, a park ranger about cleaning and draining their boats and getting them interested. But the challenge with podcasts is you have to get people to listen to them in the first place. Last bit of outreach I'm going to share with you is something I already alluded to, and that's interpersonal communication, talking with people that you respect about the issue. What we find is that people really do learn a lot about what they should do in their recreational activities from other people who do it, right? And that's not just talking about cleaning and draining. It might be like where to catch fish, what kind of tackle should I use, where's the best place for me to go hiking, what's the coolest place to see, get a great view of Lake Michigan, for example, on a hike. People are going to talk to other people that they know do that activity. And so it's an opportunity for all of us who are supportive of invasive species control and prevention activities to talk about it when we're out doing it or when we're talking with neighbors and friends and family members who may engage in these activities that may potentially spread invasive species. The research backs up the fact that we can have a lot of influence over the people, our peers and our friends and colleagues. One particular opportunity is with bait shop owners. A lot of people, or marina staff, for example, people who are sources of information and all the latest news and what's going on in our lakes around the state from a recreational standpoint, can have a lot of influence. One, because they talk to a lot of boaters and anglers, but also because they're seen as experts, right? And so if they're like, yeah, here in northern Michigan, we always clean our boats, because we don't want to get all those invasive species like they have down south, that makes an impact with people, whether they're locals who live here or people who are coming to visit. And so that is also a really valuable thing. In modern terminology, these bait shop owners, marina operators, they're influencers, right? They have a lot of influence over how their customers and clients conduct themselves when they're doing their boating and fishing activities. All right, the final aspect of the three components that I wanted to talk about was cost. So just really briefly, I want to share with you kind of our assessment of what these different kinds of systems can cost. Overall, a permanent high pressure hot water system is going to incur the greatest cost because of the initial purchase. You're going to have staff there. There's installation, materials, equipment, permits. You may have to do some site engineering to deal with wastewater runoff and so forth. So that can get very expensive. And up to $400,000 is not out of the question from the local examples that we spoke to. Unheated pressure washers are less expensive to purchase than hot water systems, but they have a lot of the same installation costs as hot water systems. And things like drainage pads and wastewater disposal for either of those can significantly add to the installation costs, especially depending on where you're locating this system. Waterless systems are less expensive. They may have greater maintenance fees because you do have to dispose of waste. If you're using a solar power source, you may have to maintain those batteries and so forth. And then again, Many stations are permanent, others are mobile, so they're trailer based. Often mobile stations, regardless of whether they have water or not, are less expensive because you don't have to do any construction. You don't have to have site permits, no electrical connections, no water connections, that kind of thing. So an alternative to all of these high cost systems are either low maintenance, small permanent systems that just provide tools, or even a homemade cleaning station that is affixing brushes, tongs, garden hose, maybe if you want to run water, to a large sign. Those kinds of things are popping up more and more often. And in fact, through Michigan State University, through our Clean Boats, Clean Waters program, we offer a free template that you can use. And there's room for local organization logos and so forth, room to hang signs. It's large enough that people will see it. And it gives people access to those tools that I think are very important to encouraging it beyond just having a sign. There are a few other factors to consider that I want to kind of wrap up with. One of those is making sure you're aware of local policy. Here in Michigan, we have a rule that says in 2019 you have to remove all of your drain plugs from your bilge, your ballast tanks, your live well. You have to drain all the water out of your boat, and you have to ensure that watercraft trailers and gear are free of any aquatic organisms. And so we make sure in Michigan that we should make sure that any cleaning station that we set up helps people comply with these laws. Otherwise, they are subject to tickets and fines. So that's something for us to keep in mind. We also need to keep in mind our plans for invasive species disposal. As I mentioned before, if we are knocking invasive species off with a pressure washer, or we're asking people to pull them off by hand, it's very important to think about what are they going to do with them when they're done. Do they just throw them on the ground? Some places put in receptacles like you see here where people can toss, weeds they pull off of their boat and allow them to dry there. A lot of other places just encourage people to toss them somewhere upland, so they'll just dry in a tree line or something like that. If you have a vacuum, then that will accumulate any invasive species that are collected, so you'll have to have a plan for disposing of them. If you're using water, you have to have a plan for wastewater disposal. As I mentioned before, at MSU, we operate several mobile cleaning stations, so we have to follow state guidelines on how we deal with our wastewater. We can discharge onto land away in an upland area according to our permit. We can also discharge our cleaning water into some system where it will be treated, like at a wastewater treatment plant, or even we often will dispose of our cleaning water at a campground, at an RV dump station, because that also goes through a treatment process. We can't let our wastewater run into bodies of water. That's critical, not just for the invasive species, but also when you clean a boat with water, you're also knocking off paint, metals, oils, fuel. Those kinds of things all end up in that wastewater. So you really don't want it washing back into your lake. Permanent stations can get permits in Michigan to drain off into a rain garden or drainage field, like I'm showing in this image here, where the water can wash off, or be connected to an in-ground storage tank or a sanitary sewer system. And of course, this is important to consider because that all costs money and design planning. We have to think about how remote this location is. Are you close enough to a water supply or electricity to be able to tap into it? Do you have access to a sewer system? If it's right there handy, it may decrease your installation cost for one of these higher end systems. If you're more remote, you may need to think about something with solar power, like the image here, or have a system that doesn't require power and is more based on hand tools. And then finally, where to put it. Actually at your boating access site. There's been some really good studies looking at this, and where do you put it that will encourage people to use it. And some of it has to do with whether your focus is on getting people to clean before they launch, which is especially important for lakes that have no or very few invasive species already. Or do you want it placed so people are more likely to use it as they're leaving? That's incredibly important for lakes that already have invasive species that may be a source of spread to other lakes. You can also design to do both, but thinking about where you put it, how traffic is going to flow, and ideally it's located at a pinch point that is not so pinched that people can't get around somebody who's cleaning, but that people have to drive near it. You don't want to put your boat cleaning station a half mile down the road from the boat launch, because why would someone go there, right? Again, we're trying to make it easy and remove barriers. And then another thing to keep in mind is that it's very valuable, and I don't have an image of it to show you here, but to have actually a space designated for boat cleaning. So people know they're not in the way. Here's a spot, arrows direct you to that location. So you know this is the place to do that behavior that you really are motivated to do. All right, to wrap up, some conclusions and recommendations. Our analysis indicates there's no single best system. You probably saw me heading that way with the information I was sharing you. Instead, it's more about selecting the most effective system for your situation. And you should think about questions like, what's the risk? What species are we concerned about? What is nearby? Or what are we already dealing with? What are your management goals? Are you trying to prevent invasions, or are you just trying to keep them at the status quo? What constraints does the location lead to, and what constraints does your budget lead to? In the end, the most effective cleaning station is one that people will use. And so that's why the outreach piece is very important. The siting, where you put it, is really important, as we've talked about already. So in the article that we did have published, that we'll have a link to in just a second, we identify a whole big table of different questions for you to consider, including questions about space. You have to think about the system and how much space it's going to take. You want it to be safe for people to operate. No one's going to get run over while they're trying to clean their boat. Traffic flow is not impeded. You also want to think about the space as far as, the risk of things getting washed right back into the lake. You want to prevent that. And you want systems that are really close to where people are doing boating activity, because that makes it easier for boaters to find it and use it. In terms of cost, you need to think not just about the initial cost, but also maintenance, staffing, any like site engineering or construction sites that is cost that will be required. Some lakes will choose to share a mobile system that moves around, and they can split the cost that way. And also think about what kind of outreach and education you're going to do about it, and how much that might cost you, and what's in your budget. You need to think about the environment. This is really focused on like what kind of invasive species you're really concerned about. And like, are boats likely to carry mud? We know that using water will help clean mud off better than just giving somebody a tool, for example. There's a lot of those things to think about. And then finally, traffic, as I already mentioned. Are most people going to be local property owners that are using that launch site, or is it going to be people traveling from other locations? Again, looking at that outreach and how important it is for everybody to clean, drain, and dry, even if they are local. And if it's a really high traffic area, thinking about units that are mobile or solar powered may not be able to keep up with high demand, and you may actually really want to connect to an electrical grid. So all of this is published and available. This is an open access research article. So if you go to the link, either that URL there at bit.ly/cleanboats, or click on that URL that I'm showing you there, that QR code, it will take you directly to the complete research article that goes through all of those questions I just talked about and summarizes all of the research that I just presented to you. I'll also make sure that the Conservation District has this link so they can send it out as well. So this is the culmination of all the information I just shared with you. And I'll also mention if you are a member of Michigan Lakes and Streams Association or get the Michigan Riparian magazine, over the summer, we also submitted kind of a summary short article. I think it's 2 pages long that kind of summarizes a lot of that work. This isn't freely available online unless you're a subscriber, but if you're interested, I'd be happy to share a PDF of it as well. So to wrap up, I just want to acknowledge our funding sources: the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the U.S. Forest Service all helped support Maria while she was doing this work. And also thank all the folks who allowed us to interview them to learn more beyond what was available in published literature. So with that, I'll wrap up, and I'll click back to that URL in case you want to see that. And I think we should have some time for questions.